Good morning.
Morning.
All right. I know we're all in a little shock over Kevin's presentation. I have a hard enough time getting out of bed in the morning, let alone all this omniverse, but he assures me it's coming. So I'm Ray Barnard, ex-IBMer, ex-Fluor employee, and currently have the honor to co-chair the Fellows Program with Jim Rinaldi for Avasant. And I appreciate all the fellows that are here, and hopefully you're having a good time. We're honored today to have Greg Goff here. I'm sure you've seen stuff about him around the world. Greg was the CEO and chairman of Tesoro, and then he put Tesoro together with Marathon Oil and was the co-chairman there. And then he decided to retire for not very long, and now he's on the ExxonMobil board of directors, as well as several other things. So what we're going to talk a little bit about today is the energy sector. And everybody knows the energy sector some days is good, some days is being attacked, some days there's a lot of craziness that goes on, right? We talk about fake news, but there's a lot of fake information that goes on in the energy sector. So what I'd like to start off with is, why don't we start off, Greg, with innovation? Okay. And you've been participating for years on different types of innovation in the energy industry, as well as kind of the economics and the science behind what you see going on over the next few years.
Yeah, thank you, Ray. It's actually a pleasure to be here. I was sitting there listening to Kevin and his example of the typewriter doing his college application. I could really relate to that. And then I started to think, we're going to talk about energy, and when I got my driver's license, I put gas in the car and drove down the road, and today I have my driver's license, thankfully, and put gas in the car and I drive down the road. And that pump that puts the gas in is almost the same after however many years, a half a century, say. And the gasoline is basically the same. There are some changes to the actual product that's happened there, but it's kind of hasn't changed quite as much. And so when you talk about the innovation in that going on, and to me, you hear a lot about climate change. And I really think what the issue is that we need to look at how the energy that we both produce and that we use, the detrimental impact that it has on the environment, and how we actually change that. How do we go about changing that? And I believe, as you asked the question, Ray, the key is really through innovation. And when you think about it, we have this tremendous history of learning, of innovations that have happened over long periods of time, and we have tremendous knowledge. We have people that are super capable of really doing great things, but we also have this need. We have this, and it's probably an urgent need, to start to change the way we do things and really drive pretty dramatic improvements on how we impact the planet at the end of the day. And it's really not just CO2. It's everything we do from all the resources we use, whether it's an electric vehicle, it's how we use water, it's how we use the land, how we handle the waste that we generate. And so it's a fairly complex problem. And when I think about innovation in the energy space, I kind of like to simplify things. For me, it's easier to get my hands around things. So when I listened to Kevin, I was like, holy cow, I'm lost here. I'm a more simple person than that. But around innovation and energy, I really see it broken into two areas. I think there's innovation through engineering, and I'll talk about that in just a minute. And then I think there's disruptive innovation. And I think it's important when you talk about those two types of innovation, who does it, what they're trying to do, and how it will impact our lives at the end of the day. So, for example, if you take innovation through engineering, you hear lots of things today about carbon capture and sequestration. To me, that's an example of innovation through engineering. I mean, we've been trying to do that for a very, very long period of time. And we're making progress, and there's lots of things that has to happen in that area. Like another example of innovation through engineering, I think, is like with renewable products. You hear a lot about using different types of plants in that to make, like, for example, renewable diesel. That's been going on for a very, very long period of time. And so that will continue. And when I think about innovation through engineering, probably the more likely people to do that are like the big companies.
Right.
When you think about it, I mean, they have tremendous capability. They have the technical capability, financial capability. They actually have a culture that supports doing things differently all of the time. And so their innovation will help drive those needed changes primarily through engineering. And they're excellent at doing it. We absolutely need it, and that will continue. Probably the more important innovation is through disruption. And my personal view is that the disruption will happen by entrepreneurs, by the innovators, small people who go out and they're driven for different things. They're driven to experiment, to explore, to take risks, to do things, and they'll be the ones that have breakthroughs, whether it be in the use of like hydrogen, like something you and I are familiar with, like nuclear energy. So the innovation, I think, happens in different areas, and it's going to be really, really critical. And we live in this world that's ripe for innovation. Right. We have such a need for it. We have urgency for it, and we have the capability to do all that. But it's how it happens that will be really, really important.
That leads us to another point. And I know when I was at Fluor, one of the big problems we always had between our customers and ourselves was the government policies and trying to get through the government bureaucracy, no matter where you were in the world. Do you think there needs to be a bunch of changes there, or does there need to be a more forward-thinking approach to that, maybe?
If you go back and frame up the problem like I did and basically said that we need to dramatically improve the way we produce and use energy to live our lives, and we need to be able to do that. When you look at how that happens, to me, it's somewhat like an equation with a lot of variables in it. You have science, you have technology, you have economics, you have all the things that drive that to happen. But you also have one really, really critical variable that's really hard to manage, and that's, I call it policy, or actually ideology. And so to do the right things, because the impact is so significant to everyone in the world, really, and we need to do it wisely. We need to do it with efficiency. We need to be very productive in how we do it. My personal view is that we're at a time where the policies that are put in place, and I'm just going to focus on the United States, are maybe as critical as anything that's ever happened, because of the change that has to go on has to accomplish certain things. And so when I look at the policies that need to be in place to help in the transformation of energy, and really it's how we live our lives at the end of the day because of the impact that it has on it, to me there are three things that are really critical from that policy standpoint to really talk about your question. The first thing is the policies have to, for the United States, those policies have to really enhance our competitive position in the world. I believe that as we go forward for my children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, the United States has to be an economic power. And energy is such a vital part of that the policies that we put in place as we transition to different types of energy have to enhance our competitive position. You can take an example, and it's always easy to go back in retrospect and look at what people or countries have done, but you just take Germany. Right. What's happened to Germany for the cost of energy, and I'm not arguing about what they've done or not done, but I believe from a policy standpoint, we really need to think about how it impacts the competitive position of the United States going forward. And it's something that typically isn't part of how governments create laws and regulations. The second thing is that we need to look at the whole life cycle consequences of the types of energy we use in that. I mean, as a society, we're smart enough to be able to say, what are the implications of the changes that we're going in place, and make sure we don't have unintended consequences. And you can see examples of policies that are in place where we've changed things that you think, wow, that's not really what we wanted to be able to do when you get into like discussions about should we be using agricultural products to create energy, or should we be helping feed people in the world? I mean, we need to, that to me is part of that whole life cycle conversation. And the third key thing from a policy standpoint is to be able to look at our standard of living. Because if you really break down how we're impacted, how we live our lives, if we want to maintain our standard of living and help other parts of the world improve their standard of living, the policies that are put in place have to be designed to address that. So it requires a higher degree of sophistication because of the change that we have to go through, and because the amount of capital. I mean, Kevin talked about $30 trillion in energy. That's nothing for what needs to be done because of everything we do. And so, but we need to do that productively and efficiently to have the best impact, especially if you believe what I do, and that is that the United States needs to maintain a preeminent economic position in the world forever. I think that's important.
Right. Well, and if you consider like natural gas, I mean, 90% of the power in this country comes from natural gas. So we love Tesla, but Tesla has to be powered up somehow. So there's got to be policies, I think, that have got to be put in place strong. Mm-hmm. You mentioned before the nuclear side of it, and I know you're personally involved with some hydrogen work. Could you expand a little bit more for the audience on some of the things you see going on there?
Well, when you look at certain types of energy, I mean, we know the impact. If you go back to my original statement, when you're trying to provide energy that's reliable, cost efficient to the world, and you also need to manage the impact, especially the detrimental impact that it has. There are types of energy that are much more attractive than other types of energy. So, for example, nuclear energy has the ability to produce, massive quantities of energy very reliably, becoming even more cost effectively, and as clean as can be, really, except for the waste that you have to deal with. So there's been a lot of advances, with the small modular nuclear reactors. I think that innovation that's occurred there has made tremendous progress, and I think they hold great hope for places in the world. I mean, you can compare Germany and France to how they provide energy to the people who live in those two countries, and you can see the impact that it has and how you manage it. Hydrogen, I think, is, like I said, to me, it's that more of a disruptive innovation. So some of the things that I'm involved in with scientists are looking at ways to not produce the hydrogen. That's one challenge. It's more how you use it, particularly in heavier modes of transportation that are harder to decarbonize, like the big semi-trucks or 18-wheel trucks. Buses, or with the railroad, maybe with boats on the rivers, pushing barges and things like that. So that to me is a form of disruptive innovation that holds a lot of promise, because the impact that it has on the environment can be very, very positive.
There's a lot of investment going into that area?
I think that's interesting. When you look at the two types of innovation, I mean, that's just maybe a oversimplification of how it works when you look at the innovation through engineering and disruptive innovation. What I discover is a lot of times it doesn't take a lot of money, but it's hard to come by. It's out there,
Right.
But it's a risk, you know, and so for people who want to invest in it, you have to have a pretty compelling plan of how you're going to be able to commercialize that business. And so although the money's out there and the rewards are tremendous, you know, from an investment standpoint, if you do the right thing, the rewards are tremendous. It's still hard to come by for that part of the disruptive innovation.
Yeah, you don't think the big oil companies will want to play in that area, or do you think that's going to be more small businesses, equity houses, that kind of thing?
Yeah, I think so. I think that, or maybe even individuals, the bigger companies, I mean, they see so many different opportunities, but it has a different risk profile.
Right.
That they're not I mean, they take tremendous risk in their business model, but this is going through a potential transformation that has different risks. And so I think the larger companies in the energy space are probably more inclined to get involved in the actual commercialization versus the development of it.
I remember along that line, I remember when I was at IBM and the first teams came in with the idea of the laptop and whatever. The only problem was that at IBM, we were making all our money off of banking machines. So the banking machine people were all in charge, and they said, forget it, that's never going to happen. We're not going to invest money on that. And they sent them all packing, guys like Jobs and Dell and Bill Gates. So I can understand how a big company might get twisted up on that, you know, on a similar way.
Yeah.
So there's a lot going on in the world today on ESG goals. Mm-hmm. I'm sure in your board position you must talk about ESG goals. What's some of your thoughts about what's going on in the world right now around ESG?
Yeah, actually from some of the work that I did, so one of the things we didn't say, I am on the ExxonMobil board, but I actually got on the ExxonMobil board through an activist campaign. So just to be very transparent about that, I was, like you said, the chairman CEO of a Fortune 100 company, and it's not very common for someone that's been in that capacity to then finish up and then get involved in a campaign to change the way a very iconic American company does business. But that's what I did. So and one of the reasons to do that was because of governance. I believed that the governance of the company, I believed that they needed to change the way they do business for the future, not only for them, but for the industry, which I spent most of my life working in, but also for the society. And the other reason was just the governance. I truly believe that the governance needed to be improved. For example, that company at the time when we were working on that, there was not one person on the board of directors that had any experience in the energy business. And I believe as part of governance of a public company, it can apply to a private just as well, but because you get to choose a group of people to provide oversight, that you should probably have a small group of those have pretty direct experience in the business that you're involved in.
Right.
And you can build a variety of backgrounds and experiences and skills around all those people, but in this particular case, that wasn't there.
Okay.
So just to be fully open about how that came about, it was quite a major accomplishment to do what we did with a very small investment in the company. But so ESG is really, I believe, is very, very critical to how companies do business. And the challenges or the problems for some companies in some of those, whether it be environmental or whatever,
Right.
are much more critical than for other companies. So from my background coming from the energy business, there's no question that the environmental impact is really, really important. And so I think a few things have to happen there. I think one, you have to be able to really measure the right things. You have to really focus on things that really have an impact on the environment and be very transparent about them and have very clear plans of how you make them better. And you need to be willing to share all that. You just have to have good disclosure about what you're doing there and the progress that you're making, and it'd be nice, if it was uniform across an entire industry,
Right.
so you can see what's happening there. But from an ESG standpoint, and particularly what the investors expect is, from an environmental standpoint, I think, is to drive those type of improvements. In the energy business, I think that's a very important variable. And one of the things that I've always said about ESG is that it's really not ESG, but to me it's ESGV, and V stands for value. The things that a company does with regards to ESG is to create value. And it doesn't necessarily always mean economic value. You can create other value. You can create values for society and how you do business. Even if you're in a community, you can do things to make the community better by doing that. But ESG by itself is like just part of what's important. The other part is the things you do from an ESG standpoint to create value. And from an environmental standpoint, what we just talked about, you can create value by improving your costs, which enhance your profitability, or actually innovate and find new ways to do things that provide revenue and makes the company stronger and better. Probably I think the most important part of ESG is around governance. Because once again, I tend to simplify governance to making decisions. And in the making decisions, it's really the leadership of a company and it's the board of directors. And in both cases, you can measure those decisions, how well they allocate capital, what kind of returns are they getting for their shareholders, how are they impacting whatever their approach is to the environment, how well they're impacting that. But you can measure things that are really, really important. And so the governance, how decisions are made and who makes them, can be measured, and there can be accountability for that, which I think is really, really important. So if you hire the CEO of a company and he or she has some period of time to perform, you can see, whether it be the value they created with the company versus their peer companies or whatever, but you can measure it. You can see the decisions that are made, the critical strategic decisions, and how they created value. So from that standpoint, that ESG, I think it's actually a good thing. It's elevated the way we look at business and how we evaluate business and how money's allocated actually to companies.
We're always in discussions, especially in a lot of these shops here. What's your thoughts around cybersecurity in relationship to being a board member or former CEO? The cybersecurity has changed so much over the years. Mm-hmm. I'd love to hear what your thoughts are about that.
Well, from my experience, because in one of our main parts of our business was running big refineries, and so the management of all that information and absolutely protecting that information so it's not penetrated by anyone on the outside is like one of the biggest risks we take. I mean, we're already in that type of business. You're already in a high-risk business. You're dealing with high temperatures, high pressure, and then if someone violates that, and if they ever got into like your control rooms and all that, I mean, you don't even want to talk about the potential consequences there.
Right.
So, and I think we're pretty good at putting the walls to protect that information, and even in simple things. One time it was just thumb drives. You bring in someone to work on your system, and they bring in the thumb drive, and then you have a major problem. So it's a risk from a board standpoint. It's the board has to help the company as an oversight, look at the risk. There's no question. And it's different for different companies, the type of exposure they have to be able to manage that risk, and because it has a tremendous impact on their customers, their reputation, everything about it.
So do you think going forward, if one of your grandkids says, Should I focus on the energy industry? What do you think? What do you think the opportunities are going to be in the future for that? You know, because I meet some brilliant people in the energy industry, but I think it's a good career, but you don't hear a lot of people saying that anymore.
Yeah, the fact is, we need more energy in the world. We're changing the ways we provide energy to the world. We're changing the ways we manage energy. It's massive. And so I think the opportunities are always going to be there. To me, the more important part is it's not, I kind of simplify it once again and say, it's not what you do, it's how you do it. And so if I had a grandchild that was going to go into the energy space, the advice that I would give them is, if they have a particular area or something, it's how do the companies do business, or what are their values? How do they go about doing business? How do they foster creativity and learning and development and things that are important? I'd focus more on that than whether they provide hydrogen or whether they provide gasoline or whatever it is. To me, the value for young people is how companies how they do their work.
Interesting. That's a really interesting point of view. I think last but not least, any advice you'd give to these technology suppliers as they continue to reach out for innovation into the energy industry and things that they might be able to help with?
Well, you mentioned, just to be clear about my background, I about 10 years ago, I took over a company that was on the verge of bankruptcy. The company at the time was worth a couple $2 billion. In 8 years, grew that company to be worth $36 billion. And when I looked forward in the industry, my view was that one of the ways to change the industry was the use of technology. And what was the most important part about that was bringing different people together to work where you could create different ways, maybe just be more creative to do it, because you have an environment where people manage risk, like you said. And so whether you're a process engineer, an electrical engineer, whatever, you are in a very, very structured environment. And so it's really hard to find new ways to do things.
To innovate, yeah.
And so to innovate. And one of the keys, I think, is to find a way for people to work together with different backgrounds. So you cannot compromise the fundamental business, but you also want to be able to change it. And so the key to me is having people that can bring in different ideas to help drive those changes. For example, in a refinery, if you have a company, you have 10 refineries, and you have control rooms in all of them, and those people in the control rooms are looking at all the advanced process controls, and they're looking for alarms that if anything goes wrong. I'm not a technology person, but most of that can probably be done with artificial intelligence.
Right.
But it's a big step. But the key probably isn't that you do it at a lower cost. The key is that you can probably optimize much more precisely, so that if you're looking at ways you're blending and doing things, and you do it without a human intervention, it probably has tremendous opportunity to drive enhanced profitability of the facilities. So the key to me, Ray, about your question is how people with the different backgrounds can come together and innovate. That's probably the best way to describe it.
Right.
And back in 2017, when I felt like we needed to become bigger, it was to create more capability to innovate. And that still has to happen. So I think that is the key. It's how people work together to innovate when you have many, many constraints because of the type of business
that you're in.
That it's in.
Well, this has been fantastic.
Thank you.
It's been a privilege to have you here.
Yeah, it's really nice.
Hopefully everybody enjoyed it and got something out of it, and I want to thank you.
Yep.
All right.
Thank you, Ray. Appreciate it.